Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a wild detective story, one that's been unfolding for over a century. It's about an invisible force that has quietly shaped, well, pretty much everything. Our cities, our health, our society, and most of us never even knew it was there.
So let's get into it. Our story starts with a huge mystery, one that links the dramatic rise and fall of crime waves and a silent crisis in our mental health, all to a single toxic chemical that used to be absolutely everywhere.
I mean, just think about that for a second. What if a huge part of our modern history, our struggles with things like violence and anxiety, could be traced back to one single thing? That's the question we're going to try and answer right now. I mean, just take a look at this graph. What you're seeing here is honestly mind-blowing. One of those lines is the rate of aggravated assault in the US. The other is childhood lead exposure. And look, the shapes of these two curves are almost a perfect match, just separated by about 23 years. It's a staggering correlation, and we'll get to exactly what that 23-year gap means in a little bit. And it doesn't stop with crime. Nope, the plot thickens. A massive study just came out in 2024 from Duke University, and it connected the dots between this exact same chemical and why generations of Americans have been struggling more with things like depression and anxiety. It was basically a silent epidemic that was messing with our minds. Okay, so to really get how we got here, we've got to jump in a time machine and go back about 100 years to a single decision that really set the stage for everything that came next.
All right, picture this. It's the 1920s. Cars are the hot new thing, and a new discovery, tetraethyl lead, promises to make car engines run way smoother, to stop that annoying knocking sound. One industry executive even called it a gift of God. But this gift had a dark side. By 1925, workers at the plants making this stuff were dying from horrific lead poisoning. It got so bad it sparked a national conference to figure out what on earth was going on.
So you have this big conference, and right away, two sides draw a line in the sand. On one side, you have industry, basically saying, hey, progress is messy and a few accidents shouldn't stop this amazing new technology. But on the other side, public health experts were sounding the alarm saying, whoa, hold on, the health of the public has to be our top priority. It was a total showdown between profit and precaution. And this is where the whole story takes a sharp turn. A consultant for the lead industry, a guy named Robert Kehoe, came up with this brilliant and, as it turns out, devastating argument. He flipped the whole script. He said, hey, it's not our job to prove this stuff is safe, it's your job to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt with cold, hard facts that it's dangerous. Yeah, and this quote from an executive at the time just says it all, doesn't it? He's basically challenging them, you have to stop us with facts, not with your fears. And, back in 1925, the health experts had a lot of fears, and for good reason. But they didn't have decades of data to back it up. So without that concrete proof, their warnings were just dismissed. The industry won.
So that was it. The industry won. And with the burden of proof totally flipped on its head, leaded gasoline just exploded. It was everywhere. And for the next 50 years, we basically ran a massive, uncontrolled experiment on the entire population.
Okay, so what's the big deal with lead anyway? Why is it so dangerous? Well, the World Health Organization is super clear about this. It's a neurotoxin. That means when it gets in your body, it makes a beeline for your brain, your kidneys, your bones, and the most important part, there's no safe level. None. Any amount is damaging, and it is especially bad for the developing brains of children. And here's the really heartbreaking part. It's especially damaging for kids. See, their little bodies just soak up way more lead than an adult's body does. It gets in the way of brain development, which can lead to lower IQs and serious behavioral problems, things like being more impulsive or aggressive. It can even get stored in a mother's bones and get released years later, exposing her baby during pregnancy. It was a perfect storm for a public health catastrophe.
I want you to just try and wrap your head around the scale of this, because it's just staggering. As of 2015, it's estimated that over 17 million Americans alive at that time had concerning levels of lead in their blood when they were kids. That's more than half the population. A whole nation exposed.
So you might be wondering, who got hit the hardest? Well, it was Generation X. If you were born between about 1965 and 1980, right at the peak of leaded gasoline use, you are almost guaranteed to be breathing in damaging levels of lead from car exhaust every single day. Okay, and this is the moment where everything starts to click. Let's go back to those wild graphs we saw at the beginning. Now that we have all this history, the pieces of the puzzle they snap right into place.
This right here, this is the big aha moment of the whole story.
A researcher named Rick Nevin was the one who put it all together. He showed that if you track how much lead kids were exposed to, you can predict crime rates decades later with terrifying accuracy. And those time lags? They line up perfectly with the ages when people are most likely to commit certain crimes. Burglary tends to peak in the late teens. There's an 18-year lag. Aggravated assault peaks in the early 20s, a 23-year lag. It fit like a glove.
So what did this all do to our brains? What was the actual cognitive cost? Well, those same Duke University researchers, they actually tried to calculate it. The number they landed on is almost unbelievable. A collective loss of 824 million IQ points from the US population. It was like a nationwide theft of our intellectual potential.
And it wasn't just about IQ points. No, they also looked at the hit to our mental health. They estimate that around 151 million cases of psychiatric disorders, things like depression and anxiety, can be directly linked back to all that lead exposure. It's like a shadow pandemic we were living through, and we never even knew it.
You know, this quote from one of the researchers really makes it easy to understand. He said for most people, the impact was like having a low-grade fever all the time. You know, you wouldn't necessarily rush to the hospital, but you'd just struggle a little bit more with everything. It just made life harder, making an entire population a little less resilient, a little more anxious.
So the good news is leaded gas was finally banned in the US back in 1996. And I mean, blood lead levels just plummeted. It was a huge win for public health. But the story doesn't end there, not even close. The ghost of all that lead is still with us. Think about it. We spent decades pumping millions of tons of lead into the air. It didn't just vanish. It settled into the soil right next to our highways. It's still in the layers of paint in millions of homes built before 1978. It's even in some of the old plumbing that brings water to our taps. The main source is gone, but its legacy is still a very real threat.
Now, the bright side here is that we do know how to deal with this. We have strategies, from totally replacing old pipes and windows to something called encapsulation, which basically just seals the lead paint safely away. Sure, each option has its pros and cons. It can be really expensive and complicated. But the important thing is that we can fix it.
So when you step back and look at this whole story, this 100-year-long, completely unintentional experiment we ran on ourselves, what's the big takeaway?
The story of lead, it's this chilling reminder that the things we did in the past cast these incredibly long shadows. And it really makes you wonder, right? What other invisible forces are out there shaping our world today? What other gifts of God might we look back on one day and realize were actually a curse? The history of lead is written, but the lessons? Well, the lessons are something we're still trying to learn.